Hey out there, rock and rollers. Welcome to episode number 144 of the Ugly American Werewolf in London Rock Podcast. Brought to you by me, your host, Mac B. the Wolf. And I will be joined, as always, by my partner in crime and co-host from the East Coast of the United States of America, Gary Action Jackson. And this is where we congregate, talk about all things classic rock, prog rock, heavy metal, early MTV, all the stuff that has lighted up our fuses over the years and made us the super duper rock fans that we are today. We appreciate you tuning in last week to our episode about the Police's debut, Outlandos D'Amour, which is turning 45 here this year. Great record, amazing debut, and more of a reggae record than I remember. I always think, well, it's kind of an early proto-punk album. It's actually more reggae than you might remember. And we had a lot of great feedback on that one. We really appreciate you downloading that one. But this week, we're going to do something a little bit fun. Come up with something original. It's not a concert review, not an album review, not an interview. It's a list. And everyone likes lists because they like to rank stuff and they like to, well, tear down your list, right? Tell you how you're so off or you don't get it or you're missing the point or you left somebody off. That always starts controversy and conversation. And that's what we want. We want people to interact and tell us who their favorites of all time are, why ours are wrong. And this list, I think, is going to be fun. It's called The Top 10 Rock and Roll Free Agents of All Time. And think about sports teams picking up free agents. Maybe not someone who they drafted or came up through their system, but eventually they add someone to the team later who then improves their team. Well, rock bands are no different. You may start off as 4 or 5 people from a certain town. You make a record or two, maybe. Maybe you make 4 or 5 of them. And then eventually someone leaves. Maybe they become disenchanted. Maybe they're not pulling their weight. Maybe drugs and alcohol are a problem. Maybe they die. But no matter the reason that they're being replaced is they have to bring in somebody new. And sometimes that new person who was not an original member of the band takes that band to a totally new level, creates a legacy that was much greater than they had without them. So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about this week. Now, we put a couple of parameters around it, okay? The band had to release at least one album without this replacement person, at least one. So if somebody was in the band and then they left before they ever recorded their first album, the person who replaced them, they couldn't make it on this list, okay? We're just talking about since they became recording artists, you make at least one album, and then the original person leaves, or whomever it was leaves, someone comes in and really ups the game of the band, changes their trajectory. And we wanted to think about, like, how does it affect their legacy? Was the person more talented than the person they replaced? What did they bring to the table? Did it improve their sound? Did it improve their fame, their popularity, their record sales, and how we see them today? Also, we wanted to give you a little information like where did they come from, who did they replace, what was their first album, all that kind of stuff. So I think you'll have some fun with this. You could probably start making up your own. It's actually hard to whittle it down to just 10. And then the order, my goodness, that could change at every minute of the day, right? You could move somebody up and down for all sorts of different reasons. But my thing was, if they hadn't gotten this person in, what would be the fortunes of the band? Would they be as popular? Would we know who they are? Would they have been as big a band? Would they have made it to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame if they didn't get this person in the band? And so we're going to exchange our 10 through 1st all-time rock and roll free agent pickups here on episode 144. But before we get into that, we've got a little bit of business to take care of. As usual, we always like to mention that we are proud members of the Pantheon Podcast Network, a network of about 100 different shows. Not all rock and roll. There really is something in there for everyone, and we've had guests on this summer from a lot of those different shows. Shout It Out Loudcast, Jay from The Hook Rocks, Mark from Performance Anxiety, Martin Popoff of History in 5 Songs. Had the folks of the Metallica Report on. I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody, and I'm sorry about that. But it's a great, great lineup of shows. I encourage you to go to pantheonpodcast.com or follow at PantheonPods to learn all about all those great shows. And I have to mention that we are sponsored by the great RareVinyl.com. Based in the UK, but shipping all over the world, you guys. Rare Vinyl's been doing this for 40 years, over 250,000 items in stock. They take great care to procure this stuff, keep it in good shape, and then send it to you wherever you are in great shape. So I don't care if you're in Michigan or Madagascar. You go to rarevinyl.com, you find something that you love, you plug in code UGLY, and you'll save 10%. Now, that's a one-time code, so don't just go buy one $8 CD. Go buy a bunch of stuff, and then you save yourself more. Maybe you could get all the shipping knocked off if you buy enough stuff. So again, go to rarevinyl.com, use the code UGLY, save 10%. We've seen a lot of great orders rolling in. And believe me, they're not all rock and roll. They've got classical music, as we know from some of the orders. They've got pop music. And they don't just have records. They've got tour programs. They've got classic t-shirts. They've got point-of-sale items from record stores. Stuff that you can't find anywhere. So go to rarevinyl.com, use the code UGLY, save yourself 10%. And so I'm excited to bring you this free agent show. I think it's a pretty neat idea. I think it'll stir up a lot of conversations, a lot of thought, and I bet we get slammed by a lot of people on social media, because I guess that's all social media is really for, is to slam people whose ideas are different from yours. But we welcome them. We want to hear what your ideas are, and we want you to hear about ours. So here we go. It's the top 10 rock and roll free agent pickups of all time, right here on The Wolf. So this is kind of a fun idea that we concocted. We're kind of sports fans, and, they're always doing lists like best free agent pickups, right? Like, how Reggie White was the best free agent pickup in, like, the history of the NFL when Green Bay got him and helped Brett Favre win a Super Bowl, and it's kind of getting to that time of year, for some leagues to start back up. It's like, okay, whose free agent picks are going to work out, whose will be a bust, all that kind of stuff. But if you think about it, it's the same thing in a rock band. If you lose somebody and then you get someone new, that's a free agent pickup.
Correct. Either for difference of opinion or for alcohol, drug abuse, death. Yeah, all kinds of different things. But yeah, I think we're going to focus on a member of the band that they picked up where the band just got a lot better.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what our focus is here today, is like, what are the best free agent pickups in rock history? When you got somebody new in the band, did they take the band to a new level? Whether it's a new level of musicality, like the band now makes better music, or it's a new path to stardom, like you're a bigger band than you ever were before, like you were kind of middling, okay, we're selling some records, we're doing some tours, and then somebody comes and takes you takes you to the next level there. And not as easy as I thought it would be to do this list.
Yeah, because at first, this is going to take 5 minutes, but then you start second guessing yourself. But then the other thing that we got to set the rules here. Are we talking about the band got better for a period of time, or are we talking just the one record where they were like, wow, this is really a game changer?
All right, first let's lay out the rules. Okay, the rules are the band would have to have released an album with somebody, and then at least one, could be many, but you have to have at least one album release with someone who then leaves for whatever reason, musical differences, death, they get kicked out, drugs, whatever it is, and then someone else comes in and records at least one album with them. So for instance, Kirk Hammett of Metallica wouldn't count, because although famously Dave Mustaine was in Metallica before him and helped write the songs, Kirk recorded on their first album, Kill 'Em All. Now, Robert Trujillo could be one, right? Because they did many albums before he came along, and then he eventually replaced Jason Newsted. So you could count him as a great one, and we'll see if he makes any lists. But so those were the rules. They had to make at least one album before this person entered the band. And then the quality is, it's kind of up to you. It's you can weigh it however you want. Did it make the band better? Did it make their music better? Did it put them on a new trajectory? So maybe it's just one album. You're like, okay, this is the difference that person made. Maybe that person only came in for an album or two and then they went away. But that was part of whittling it down. That was hard for me, because I got to about 12 pretty easily. And I've got about a half dozen honorable mentions that we'll talk about at the end of the list.
Okay.
But for me, it was like, what kind of impact did this have for the band? What kind of historical impact does it have in music overall, or their genre of music, or their catalog? And how did it change their trajectory as far as how popular or big of a band were they before this person came in? And then how big were they once they had that person in the band? So it was hard to get to 10, and then actually ranking them was damn near impossible. And I'll probably second guess myself 3 times through this, but was that kind of similar for you?
Yeah, because it was easy at first, and then you really start thinking about, like, what are we talking about? Impact, like, for that one record, or impact like the first record was that they did was okay, but then they really came on a couple 2-3 albums later. That was my problem, or my issue was, you could second guess this list 1,000 times.
Yeah. And it's just, again, it's one of those things where it's, who are your top 10 favorite bands? Well, today you may always be the same top 3 or 4, but those 5 through 10 may change based on what you heard on the radio that day, right?
Well, it's interesting too, because you had mentioned Metallica and Jason Newsted. He's not on my list. I didn't put him on this list.
Not a surprise.
So there's the problem is he got there and then they started to get big. But was it because of him, or was it just because that was the time and it really could have been anybody playing the bass and they still would have been the same band?
Yeah. I mean, that's a fair question. Yeah. So this will be fun. This ought to be good for some discussion, and there's possibility we'll have to come do this again tonight to finish it. But all right,
right, because this could be about a 4-hour conversation.
Right, exactly.
Hi, my name's Stefan Shirazi from the Metallica Report, and you're listening to the Ugly American Werewolf in London.
We'll start with each other's 10. We'll talk about each other's 10, and then we'll do each other's 9, and we'll kind of go up that way, all right? So I'll start with my number 10, which is going to be kind of a weird one, considering we're not real big fans of this band.
Okay.
But number 10, I put Kevin Cronin of REO Speedwagon.
Interesting. Okay,
because they did a first album without him, with a guy named Terry Luttrell as their original lead singer.
Mm-hmm.
And then and then he left, and he did a band called Starcastle. So in 1972, the first album that Kevin was on was called REO 2. All right. Then he left again in 73. They brought in a guy named Mike Murphy to come in, and he did a few albums. And Kevin Cronin was off being a solo artist. And then in 76, they had him come back again. So technically, he was a 2-time free agent pickup for them. And I think he was a solo artist both times. I know he was the second time. I couldn't find a ton of information on the first time. But that's why if you listen to classic rock radio, they only play the live version of Riding the Storm Out, because they made that when Mike Murphy was in the band. But it's a killer song. But if you don't hear it with Kevin Cronin, it doesn't sound right. So that's why whenever you listen to classic rock and they play Riding the Storm Out, they, at least very rarely, do you ever hear the Mike Murphy version. It's generally always the live version with Kevin Cronin.
Riding the storm out, riding the storm out, riding the storm out.
Now, again, I'm not a huge REO Speedwagon fan. I know you're not either. But with him in the band, they became huge. That High Infidelity record that they did in 1980 or 81 or whatever it was, that was the number 1 selling album of the year. That sold like 10 million copies. And we know the huge hits they had in the 80s, which made them multi-platinum and really allowed them to continue to tour to this day. So while I'm not a huge fan, and maybe they're not a Hall of Fame, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame kind of band, to me, Kevin Cronin is my number 10 pick.
Okay. Now, just out of curiosity, because I did zero research on Kevin Cronin, does he write the songs also?
Yeah, he writes a lot of the songs.
Okay. So that was a big criteria for me. Is you're there, but are you contributing? Songwriting, or what's your contribution? Okay,
yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah,
my number 10 was Marty Friedman from Megadeth.
Okay.
And yeah, because to me, and this was a tough one because he doesn't write the songs. But I feel like once he got there for Rust in Peace in 1990, he replaced a guy, Jeff Young, who was only there for one album, So Far So Good, in 88. And this is where it's like I could go either way on this, because I think his playing definitely moved them into a different stratosphere as far as what he could do with soloing. He could do a lot of acoustic work. He's a hell of a player, but he doesn't write any of the songs. So is it a case where Mustaine just kind of got into a different era of being a better songwriter, and then having this dude beside him put them into, Thrash's number 1 position in that 89, 90 up until the early 90s. I think Freeman was there until the late 90s, early 2000s. But that to me, he changed the game as far as his playing.
Well, that's a cool pick, and obviously Marty's a badass thrasher guitar player,
and he's back. I don't know if he's back with them now. I know he's done shows with them. I don't think he's back in the band, but of all the dudes that Mustaine ever steamrollered and threw out of the band, it seems like they have a pretty good relationship. he can come back and play some shows and they can still be friendly toward each other.
Okay, yeah, that's cool. And I think he may even live in Japan at least.
Yeah,
part of
he
the year.
does.
I mean,
it's very fun. He's a very diminutive person, and to see him speak fluent Japanese is pretty out there.
変わらないかもしれないけど、とにかくもっと深く分かれば、なんかいつも毎日の選択含めて、ひょっとしたら少しだけでも変えたら、みんなそのぐらいだったらなんとか変わるかもしれないんじゃないですか。
That's cool. Well, that's a good pick. Well, and another thing we should probably talk about is we wanted to put some information around these picks as well. So we generally try to talk about the band they were in before they came to the big band, the person they replaced, the year, if we got it, the album, the first album they played on, and then we talk about their legacy, right? As far as what did it mean to the band and to their career. So, but that's a good pick, number 10, Marty Friedman. Is not going to be on my list, just like I'm sure Kevin Cronin is not going to be on yours.
That is correct. Yes.
All right. Then why don't you go with your number 9 now?
I'm going to say probably number 9 is Adrian Smith from Iron Maiden.
Mm-hmm.
And only because he got there for Killers in 81. So that was kind of right before they took off. He replaced Dennis Stratton in 1980 from a band called Urchin. And
that's right.
My other thing too is he would go on to do a lot of stuff for them, be a big time songwriter. Basically, as we've talked about before on our Iron Maiden shows when we saw him live, he is the lead guitarist in the band. But on Killers, he doesn't have any writing credits. That doesn't show up until Number of the Beast. So this was one of those, like, they picked him up. I think he made the band better, but his contributions would come in later. Up until this day.
Well, that's true. And he is a fantastic guitar player, heck of a good songwriter. And yeah, he did leave Iron Maiden for a while, had a decent solo thing. And the stuff that he's doing now with Richie Kotzen is getting a lot of attention too. You know, it's like he can still be in Iron Maiden and do side projects that are good as well, you know, so so that's a good pick, and we may hear about that band a little bit later in the countdown. You know.
I'm sure we will.
Now for my number 9, I cheated a little bit.
Oh boy,
because I'm picking 2 people, and
what?
there's 2. I've done this twice on this list, so I know that's a little bit cheaty. But I made up the rules, so I'm going to break my rules, right? So for number 9, I put Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page in the Yardbirds. Okay. And obviously Jeff came first. He was doing a lot of session work, just like Jimmy was. Obviously, he replaced Eric Clapton in the Yardbirds. Came in 65. He was in a band called the Tridents, but he was doing some session work, And the thing is that the Yardbirds didn't release a ton of albums, but it was called the Yardbirds, but it kind of became famous for known as Roger the Engineer.
Mm-hmm.
And then before too long, Paul Samuel Smith decided he didn't want to play anymore. Jimmy Page came as the bass player until they could convert Chris Drea to bass, and then it was Jimmy and Jeff, and then technically Jimmy replaced Jeff as the sole guitar player in the Yardbirds in 66, and he was on Little Games, and obviously he took the new Yardbirds out, who eventually became Led Zeppelin. They're in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame because of this band. They're also in Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for what they did after this band. The Yardbirds kind of ended not too long after this, but the Yardbirds are a seminal kind of blues and psychedelic rock act. They may not have been there for that long. They may not have made that many records while they were in the band, but their legacy is so strong. I was going to put them at number 10 just because they didn't make a ton of records with the Yardbirds, either of them. But because they are such legendary guitar players, I had to kind of put them in here and put them at 9.
Yeah, I figured they'd show up somewhere here. That combination of the 3 of those guys is insane that they were in the same band. But you're right, I don't think the Yardbirds ever really got there. They never really got to the next level, like of the Stones or the Beatles or really into the big time of the British Invasion, then that could be because the lineup changed so many times.
Maybe, yeah, maybe so. I mean, I know Jeff had a hard time on that tour that they did of America, and Jimmy toured with them in America like 4 times. Like they just kept coming to America, kept coming, and it helped blow them up, you know. But it also helped him understand how the business works. How do you get around America? Oh, who's this Peter Grant guy? He might be helpful in breaking us a new band in America. So it may be more of their Jeff Beck and Led Zeppelin legacy or because of their time in the Yardbirds, but that's why I put them at number 9. Okay, and then I'll go again now. Number 8.
Okay.
Ronnie James Dio, Black Sabbath.
Okay.
Obviously, he replaced Ozzy. He didn't come out of nowhere. He had been in Rainbow with Richie Blackmore. He had been in Elf before that, and he joined in 1980 for the incredible Heaven and Hell album. And his legacy is intact. I mean, that album is heavy metal royalty. I mean, to me, that's Desert Island Disc for heavy metal albums. Maybe even more so than most. For me personally, it's more so than the Ozzy albums. Not that I don't like Ozzy, not that he didn't help create that music and create that sound that was identifiable with Black Sabbath and heavy metal. But Ronnie James Dio's voice was incredible, and his legacy in metal is intact to this day. Of course, he would eventually leave after a couple albums and a live album. They did Heaven and Hell, they did Mob Rules, they did Live Evil, and then he was out. He came back for Computer God. Timing wasn't good. He's out. Then they came back and did Heaven and Hell in the aughts, and it was very successful. And I got to see him do those classic songs live with Geezer and Tony and Vinny, and it was awesome. Now, obviously, he didn't stay in the band, and Black Sabbath was huge before he got there, and then after he left, they kind of went through some troubled times. So it's not like he took them to a level they were never at before. They were arguably bigger before him, and they did fine with him, at least in the early 80s. But I just think that this was the best match. I mean, better than the stuff he did as a solo artist. As much as I love Rainbow, better than the stuff he did in Rainbow. Those 2 albums are killer, and this cements his legacy as a legend. So that's why I put him at number 8 with Black Sabbath.
Okay, he's definitely on my list. He's a little higher up than that, only because you were talking about him coming into Black Sabbath. I think he basically resurrected them. I mean, but what did they like? Can you name one song off of Never Say Die from '78?
Title track?
Yeah. At that point in time, no one really cared. They kind of passed their prime. Everybody was sick of Ozzy. Ozzy was sick of everyone. So they decided that was it. He came in, did Heaven and Hell, did Mob Rules, and took them, made people remember about Black Sabbath, and then took them into the 80s and put them in a position where they could come back and do the stuff with Ozzy, I think, in the early 2000s also. So I think that he definitely contributed a lot to this. I mean, he wrote all the lyrics for Heaven and Hell. So he came in as a plug and play guy. The other thing that I was trying to do too was look at the ages of the people that when they came in. Mm-hmm. So for instance, Adrian Smith was 24, Marty Friedman was 22, Ronnie was 37 when he joined Black Sabbath. Yeah. So he was already established. So to me, that's you didn't get some kid who was, right. I think he's got some flash, but whatever. You knew what you were getting with this guy. You wanted him to come in and write this record for you and put you back on the map.
I'm with you there. Yeah. Absolutely. All right. So who do you have at number 8?
Number 8. Okay. This is controversial here. I have Mick Taylor from the Rolling Stones.
Okay.
And I say that because I don't know. He came in and he did the classic golden age lineup of the Rolling Stones, with Sticky Fingers, Exile on Main Street, Goat's Head Soup, It's Only Rock and Roll. He didn't really write any of the music. The only writing credit I could find for him was Ventilator Blues on Exile. Mm-hmm. He definitely brought his style of guitar, definitely amped up the playing. But here's the thing. The last album Brian Jones was on really was Beggar's Banquet. Right? Because, Let It Bleed doesn't really count. He was on a couple things, but he was already on the way out.
Yeah. And Mick Taylor did a couple things on Let It Bleed.
Correct. Yeah. So that was kind of that transitional record. So really, I'm going with Sticky Fingers and Beggar's Banquet as the 2. Brian Jones on Beggar's Banquet is credited for slide guitar, acoustic guitar, harmonica, mellotron, sitar, maracas, and there was something else that he did too that was a tiny little thing. It looked like a baby
Being an
sitar.
asshole.
That,
Oh,
well,
baby.
yes. Well, yeah, he's a head of black belt and being an asshole. The tambura. Now,
Okay.
Taylor was credited with electric guitar and acoustic guitar on Sticky Fingers.
Mm-hmm.
So my point is, had Jones been able to keep it together, I think he's one. They could have done something totally different. He just couldn't do it. He was completely out of his mind, unusable at that point in time. So they had to move on from him and do something different. So
Yep.
that's why I'm like, I like Mick Taylor. I like the way that he plays. I love those albums, but there's always that what if with Brian Jones to me. What if he had held his stuff together? What would they have done with him in the later records?
Well, and you could it's a what if with Mick Taylor too.
Right.
He didn't maybe have the breadth of or the weirdness and the odd stuff that Brian could bring to the table, but he was maybe the best damn slide blues guitar player like ever, and really changed their sound in a major way in a positive way. He's kind of a wunderkind at that. So yeah, his first album with Sticky Fingers came from the Blues Breakers, very famously, just like Eric Clapton, just like Peter Green. So yeah, that's a good call. He might just end up on my list as well. We're just going to have to.
Alrighty. Just have to wait and see.
Have to wait and see. Yeah. Have to wait and see. All right, so that's number 8 for both of us. What have you got for number 7?
Number 7, I think I'm going to go with Phil Collen from Def Leppard.
Big call, yeah.
Yeah, came in '82, replaced Pete Willis from a band called Girl, which I guess was I couldn't tell you one song that they wrote, but apparently they were pretty famous in London because the Def Leppard guys knew him.
Yeah, that's right.
Pete Willis was not working out at this point in time. I think he was a guy who was a pretty good club band person, and maybe, album 1, album 2. Now they're getting to the point where they want to be big time. He's not the guy for it. He's starting to drink now. They bring in Colin, I guess from that documentary we watched with Neil, they actually brought him to Mutt Lange and said, "Is this the guy?" And Mutt said, "Yes."
Okay.
The only reservation I have is that while he would go on to do a lot of stuff for the band, he has no writing credits on Pyromania. So his contributions as far as writing would come with Hysteria and later on. But I think he definitely injected kind of the rock star, rock god persona into the band that they did not have before. Because even though Steve Clark, he was the blues guy, the Jimmy Page guy, he never wanted to be that shredder that Phil Collen was.
But Phil Collen
still
could
is
be,
today.
yeah.
Yeah.
And is still in great shape, still singing well, still playing well, taking care of himself. He actually made my honorable mentions list. He was top 12, and I'm like, well, he's got to be top 10, doesn't he? And then I just kind of said, all right, well, someone has to fall out of this list, and so I left him out just because I don't know. I mean, I had to take him out. I had to take somebody out. I had my reason. I guess I could just defend some of these other ones better, or it's like they hit the big time with Pyromania, no doubt about it. But some of Pete Willis's songwriting is on Pyromania,
Right. Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, it was hard for me to leave him off, but I mean, you can only have 10. And I kind of cheated with a couple of duos anyway, so I had to take him off. But, good call on Phil. My number 7 is Steve Perry from Journey, because that's a big deal. When he replaced Robert Fleischman, their fortunes changed in a huge way. They went from being a maybe gold selling act to a multi-platinum selling act overnight. Like all the stuff they did before Steve Perry got there sold okay. All the stuff after he got there, we're talking 3 million, 6 million, more even, throughout the 80s and stuff like that. He's got a very recognizable voice, so much so that John Cain and Neil Schon had to go to the Philippines just to find somebody who was close enough, right? So, and his first album was Infinity in 1977. That had Lights, which is kind of the San Francisco theme song, kind of, and it just started to propel them. And songs like Wheel in the Sky, Fleischman couldn't have sung the songs the same way, He just gave them more dynamics. He did help write all the songs. He did do some solo stuff. And he was in some strange band names over the years before he got to Journey. Alien Project may have been about the closest one to Journey. I just think that's a great name. But he did work with some other famous people in that. But I mean, you can't deny, I mean, without Steve Perry, Journey's not a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame band. They're not one of the biggest bands of the 80s. But with him, they absolutely are. So to me, Steve Perry is it's definitely one of the top 10 free agents of all time.
Yeah, I think you're right. That he took them from kind of an okay band to, you know, what they became, you know, 10 million selling super group.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, my only problem with Journey is I wish they could have hung on to Greg Raleigh, because I like when the two of them sing together.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
It's interesting when like the same way, right? When they sing back and forth, you can tell Raleigh is a great singer, but Perry is just that much better. Like, he is the front man. When he comes in, he just takes over, and you're like, yeah, that's the guy. Sorry,
that's
Greg.
the guy. No, he's got the voice. There's no doubt about it. It's not really up for debate, you know. Yeah, he's the real deal, you know. And that's why they tried Steve Algieri. Oh, he's Steve Perry with a perm. No, he's not. I think they tried Jeff Scott Soto for a while. He's Arnel Pineda. He's really good. He sings his heart out every night, doing his best Steve Perry impersonation, and he does a fine job. I've seen him live, and I appreciate what he does.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason he's doing it is because of Steve Perry, right? I mean, you know.
Right, correct.
Yeah.
That's what you're there for. You're not there to do anything new. You're there to make the crowd happy.
That's right. All right. So pretty cool. We have no repeats so far in our list. I think that's probably going to change as we get a little higher up here.
I would think so. What number are we on now?
We're going to be on 6.
6.
And I'm going to go first, so you get time to get yours together.
All right.
6, I'm inserting Phil Collins to Genesis in 1970. Now, the reason this isn't higher is because the first 6 or 7 years he was in the band or whatever, it was certainly the first 5 or so years, he was quote unquote just the drummer, okay?
Right.
And then Peter Gabriel leaves after Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, and then after auditioning 100 different people, they said, okay, we'll just have Phil do the singing. He's fine. He's got it anyway, right? And then they famously had Bill Bruford on the first tour of America before they got Chester Thompson in to do it. Phil was in Flaming Youth before he joined the boys in Genesis. His first album was Nursery Crime, as it was for Steve Hackett. Now, Phil was... They always kind of did music by Genesis. So we figured Tony Banks and Peter Gabriel and Mike Rutherford and even Steve Hackett did most of the writing, and Phil would help out in the areas. Obviously, he did the drumming parts. And he did sing on a couple of songs before Peter left. But once Pete left, and then even after once Steve left on the Then There Were Three album, because they did Trick of the Tail and Wind of the Wuthering with Steve Hackett, but without Peter Gabriel. Those did okay, but as soon as they did the And Then There Were Three album and the Follow You, Follow Me song came, then their audience doubled overnight. All of a sudden, girls were like, there's a band called Genesis? Oh my God, I didn't know that. And then getting into the 80s, they were this juggernaut, right? They were huge on MTV, selling all sorts of records. They wouldn't have sold 100 million records if Phil Collins had not become their singer and one of their main songwriters. He wouldn't have had one of the biggest solo careers anyone's ever had if he hadn't started as the singer in Genesis. But because he was quote unquote just the drummer for those years, yes, contributing, yes, an important member of the band, but he's not out front singing. He's not a main songwriter. I have him at 6. But it's interesting that 2 100 million selling record careers, that of Genesis and that of Phil Collins solo, wouldn't have happened if he hadn't joined as the drummer in 1970.
Well, yeah, and here's where I was kind of having a hard time ranking these things, because you're right. When he joined, he was just the drummer. He didn't pick it up until several albums later, where he became the voice. But this one, so you're talking about Nursery Crime in 71. Yes, the pickup of Phil and Steve Hackett, that kind of started like the golden age of Peter Gabriel Genesis records.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's why I was like, man, it's hard to rank this, because you're right. He kind of was laying in wait there for a while until he could really come on and show you what he could do as far as taking the band in a whole new direction.
That's right.
And then making them giant rock stars and not prog rock. Well, I mean, not that they weren't big stars back then, but like just in a different,
it's a different stratosphere. Yeah, it's
correct.
a bunch of dudes scratching their chins like, this is very good what they're doing here. And then it's, people, women, families, follow you. They're all over it, It's two very different bands, both successful, but the 80s Genesis is enormodome successful. It's crazy.
Yeah, and I think I probably had him about the same on the list, only because he wasn't going to come on at that time.
Oh, so you have him at number 6?
Well, 6-ish. I'm kind of moving these things around now in my head.
Well, you got to pick a 6. It's your turn now, man.
Okay. This is hard. You know what? I think for if I don't say, you know what, I'll say Phil Collins is 6, because I think now, talking about this, my next pick, I think I can move up higher. But it's kind of the same. It's kind of the same thought, though, because I would say that it's David Gilmour from Pink Floyd.
Okay, you got David Gilmour at number 5.
Yeah.
Okay. And why?
So we're kind of in the same deal here. They need somebody. So he comes in, he replaces Syd Barrett, who was the architect and the kind of the brains behind, I don't know about brains, kind of the heart and soul of Pink Floyd at the beginning. He begins to develop some mental problems. It kind of drifts away. They don't know what's going to happen. They pick up David. He comes on for Ummagumma in '69. Mm-hmm. Doesn't write anything on that, but goes on to contribute big time later on. Was in a band. I got Flowers. Then they became Bullet. I don't know. There wasn't a whole lot on him before he joined it. He was only 23 when he came on board.
Gotcha.
So to me, this was one of those, like, he would, not that he didn't contribute right off the bat, but I think his big stuff would come in later.
Well, that's true. And his big stuff would be awfully big.
Right. I mean, it's going to be huge, but not at this point in time.
Interesting. Okay. Well, hold on to that thought, because we may see David Gilmour again.
Okay.
On somebody else's list.
Hi, my name is Renee Richardson from the Metallica Report, and you're listening to The Ugly American Werewolf in London. Did I get that right?
My number 5 is my second duo, and that's Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks of Fleetwood Mac. Okay. Fleetwood Mac came out of the remnants of the Blues Breakers in '68 or so, with Peter Green fronting the band, basically getting John McVie and Mick Fleetwood from the Blues Breakers, the rhythm section, giving them that name because he knew he would eventually move on and do something else, and then they would have something for themselves. He was a very generous man, but also became a bit of a weirdo and had mental problems of his own. They did well. I think they did very well in England. They did okay in America. They had a few lineup changes. And eventually they brought in Christine Perfect from Chickenfoot to put some female vocals in the band. But it was 75 when Mick Fleetwood had heard the Buckingham Nicks album, asked Lindsey to join as a singer, songwriter, guitar player. They said, no, me and Stevie are a package deal. So it's like, okay, yeah, they didn't even audition. He just said, fine, bring her, you're both in. And then they did the 1975 self-titled Fleetwood Mac album, which was really, really big. Lindsey replaced Bob Welch as the guitar player. Stevie just kind of came in as another singer. So that was 75. And then, of course, Rumors in 77 was enormous. Look, both Lindsey and Stevie are talented songwriters. So they went from having Christine in the band as the only songwriter, really, to having now these two amazing songwriters, both with great voices. Lindsey's a heck of a guitar player, a heck of an arranger, and basically he came in and took over for the most part. Lindsey came in and ran the show, especially after Rumors. You know, they couldn't go to the bathroom without Lindsey's permission after that. Okay, and they went from being a cool blues outfit to being one of the biggest pop rock acts of the 70s and the 80s. And they're still going. So, that's my number 5, Buckingham Nicks.
Thank you so much. It's our honor.
Well, I'm glad that you made that a twofer, because I was kind of going through I was just Googling, best lineup changes or whatever. And they did mention, it was Ultimate Classic Rock or something, said Lindsey Buckingham. And you can't take one without the other.
Right.
In that world, because to me, Stevie's voice, I understand they went back and forth, they traded off, but once she got there, if you took all of the classic Fleetwood Mac tracks, she's got the bulk of them singing lead.
She does.
She brought a lot to them as far as the vocals, and just kind of being that sex symbol for the 70s.
Exactly. Yeah. Not to mention, she went on to have a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame solo career, thanks to what happened in Fleetwood Mac. I mean, you were talking about, what's his name from Journey, the keyboard player?
Greg Raleigh.
Greg Raleigh, who is
Yeah.
probably the most unknown two-time member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, to Stevie Nicks, who is the lone female two-time member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and most deserving to be so, and yes, enchanting, and like you got them together, and it was that Buckingham Nicks. By the way, if you can find that LP somewhere, you got a little piece of gold in your hands there. You've got at least hundreds of dollars, no matter what condition it's in. If it's mint, don't lose that, baby.
Where could you get that, though, possibly?
Well, I mean, you could have to find it in a bin somewhere, and somebody didn't really know what they had. They've still, to this day, never released it on CD, which is shocking to me.
But you couldn't look for it, like, on a website or anything?
You could probably find it on eBay. You could probably find it some places. You're going to have to pay for it, though, or someplace else.
Someplace like Rare Vinyl?
I don't think they have one because I've looked.
But you could keep looking there, though.
Exactly. You should go to Rare Vinyl and just get updates from Rare Vinyl. And then if it did come and it's 600 pounds or something like that, you could save 60 pounds with the code UGLY.
There you go.
There you go, guys.
The most insane story about that is, wasn't Fleetwood Mac going to record at some recording studio? They wanted to know what it was all about. And the guy said, well, here's a record we just recorded. And it was Buckingham Nicks.
Was that the record plant? I don't know.
Yeah. And then they said, well, these guys, this is fantastic. We need these people. We need him in the band. And then he brought her along. And it was just happenstance.
Yes, but it was incredible happenstance. And it just shows you how tenuous all this is, because I mean, my experience is all bands are on the brink of breaking up at any given moment because it's a 4 or 5-way marriage at all times. So that could fall apart because someone's acting like a jerk, or someone's got drug or alcohol problems, or someone's listening to the wrong people. And so that could happen at any time. And also, all the stuff that happens by chance, that what if that didn't happen? What if he didn't show up to the audition that day? Or, what if they'd given him, some other album to listen to? I mean, so many different roads you could go down there. So it's just, there's so many people who we haven't heard because the luck happenstance didn't happen that way. But we just have to appreciate the ones that have happened, I guess.
Well, and especially back then. I mean, you were talking about Journey. The only reason that Arnell got into the band was because somebody sent Neil Schon a YouTube video of him playing at the Hard Rock in Manila and said, you've got to check this guy out. So back in the days before the heady days of the internet, it was just luck of the draw. And then we were talking to Chris Slade too, and he was, man, I can't remember what the name of that place was, but it was some coffee shop where if you were a musician, you went in there and
you hung out,
kind of hung around, and looking for a job. So, yeah,
waiting for the next gig. Yeah, absolutely.
Correct.
All right. Well, so number 4 for me is one who's already on your list. I put Mick Taylor of the Rolling Stones, and you're right. He didn't write a lot of the songs, or at least he didn't get credit for writing the songs.
That's probably a better, because I think that was part of the problem why he decided to leave, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And we went over that on our Goat's Head Soup episode with performance anxiety. Mick and Keith were pissed that Alan Klein had taken 50% of their publishing. So once Mick Taylor joins the band, they're not in the mood to share. They're like, no, now we need to keep everything that's ours. And, even on a track that Keith didn't play on and Mick Taylor helped write, Keith got the writing credit and Mick Taylor didn't get anything. And that's like, okay, this isn't working for me. But the albums that he played on, including Let It Bleed, through It's Only Rock and Roll, that was the heyday of the Rolling Stones. This is one of the biggest rock and roll bands ever. Obviously one of our favorites, still going today. And it was because of his flavor that he added on these songs. It was the mix that he added. It's immortal. These are the best records they ever did. So his tenure was short. No, he didn't get a lot of writing credit. But in my opinion, they wouldn't still be doing it today if they hadn't had Mick in the band those years, because they went from being kind of a pop act where girls would scream and they would run off the stage in the 60s to what they did in the late 60s and the early 70s. This is a real hardcore blues rock and roll band, and he was a big part of it.
Yeah. And I think that they would not have had the legacy they have today if it wasn't for those records. I mean, the stuff with Ronnie Wood in the 80s, I mean, it's good, but it's not that, it's still relying on that 70s kind of the 70s era to prop it up, I think.
I agree with that. All right. So who would your number 4 be?
Number 4 is going to be Bruce Dickinson from Iron Maiden.
So we already have 2 Iron Maidens on your list here.
I do. And I think because this was the record that broke them. This was the record that kind of put them into the different stratosphere they wanted to be in. But again, on this one, he didn't write any of the songs. He had the voice, but they had the songs. He would start writing songs later. But I think this was the record that put them on the path of where they wanted to go. Came out of a band called Samson.
Yep.
He joined in 1981, replaced Paul Di'Anno, who we've talked about this a couple of times on this show. We like the Paul Di'Anno records. He does a great job for what they were doing then. He just couldn't take them to the next level where Bruce could. And, you know, the whole thing about when he joined Samson, you know, it doesn't pay well. What do you mean it pays? So somebody who all he ever wanted to do was play music once he got that bug in him. And I think that, you know, still on tour today, still making records today in 2023, this band would not have been where it is without him.
I totally agree with you. And he's my number 3 since we're that close anyway.
Okay.
I put him at number 3. Yeah. Comes in for Number of the Beast. That was the game changer for them. And his vocal style is unbelievable. It's operatic almost. And you're right. Yeah, he would write more songs later. But as a frontman, someone who could command the stage, who runs all over the place, still today in his 60s. I mean, we just saw him do it live, and he was amazing in Europe. And he doesn't seem to be slowing down now. Paul Di'Anno, he's more of a club act guy. He almost didn't really want to be worldwide famous. Just being the baddest dude in a bar, that's as high as he ever really wanted to get. He didn't see a world beyond. Whereas Bruce he's an extraordinary man outside of the band, right? You know, so yeah, no, I mean, Bruce Dickinson, Iron Maiden, could have been number 1, could have been higher, but I put him at 3. You put him at 4.
Yeah, I'm gonna probably guess that number 1 is gonna be the same, but we'll get to that in just a few moments.
Oh, I don't think it will.
You don't think so?
I don't think it will.
Interesting. Okay. So,
You're going number 3. Yeah.
Number 3, I'm going to put Sammy Hagar from Van Halen.
Interesting.
And I say that because so Sammy was in Montrose for a while, and I think Montrose did well kind of on the hard rock deal. I didn't ever remember hearing them until I was in high school, and then hearing Sammy Hagar solo stuff and then working it back to Montrose. But that's where he came from, was, you know, I Can't Drive 55, the solo stuff. Replaced David Lee Roth in 1985. And the reason that I put him up so high is because Van Halen was coming off of a huge record, the biggest record they'd ever had. And it's like, and now everybody in the band is important, but it's really tough to lose the lead singer. Yes. And so to replace him with somebody else and to go on to have success, that was probably not, most people probably wouldn't have bet on that. Now, Sammy was 39 when he joined the band, and I think this was another calculated move, kind of like Ronnie, where you needed somebody who was going to come in, write the songs, kind of, you know, as you were talking about with Lindsey Buckingham, kind of lead the band. That's what they were looking for, and that's what they got with Sammy Hagar.
Wow, everybody. I just want to say thank you.
Well, that is a very interesting pick. Probably going to be a controversial pick.
Oh, boy.
Of people who listen to this. I have him as an honorable mention.
Okay.
And the reason I didn't put him in the top 10 was because Van Halen was already huge before he got there. Now, with respect to him, 1984 only got to number 2. It was the highest of any of the Dave albums. All of the Sammy albums went to number 1, but part of that's because Van Halen's already famous and huge, right?
Right.
He is a talent. He's a much better singer than Dave is, and he's a decent guitar player too. And I kind of wish there'd been more dual guitar stuff in his era of Van Halen. But because the work was done, I mean, they have 2 diamond selling albums. He's not on either one. And, you know, Van Halen was enormous. I mean, in 1984, they're the biggest band in the world. Sammy comes in, he does a good job. They write some good songs. They do some amazing tours. And I would hang out with Sammy in front of Dave 7 days of the week. I think he's a lot more talented than him. But did he take them to the next level, or did he just kind of keep them at this huge level? And I feel like it was more the latter than the former. So that's why I didn't put him on the band, because it's not like no one would have heard of Van Halen if Sammy hadn't come along. Whereas, you know, if Bruce Dickinson hadn't come along, Iron Maiden's fortunes would be completely different.
Right.
You know, so that's the way I decided to do it, so that's why Sammy, I made my big list. I'm like, no, I'm not going to put him on. He's honorable mention because they were already Van Halen. They were already a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame type of band. And it was already Eddie's extraordinary guitar playing that put them on that level. They needed a singer. They got a great one, but it wasn't, and it changed their sound, but it wasn't like, okay, now they're at a whole new level. No, they're still at about the same level. So that was my reasoning.
Interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So you want to go number 2?
I can go number 2. Number 2 is your friend and mine, Brian Johnson from AC/DC.
Interesting pick. Yeah.
So replaced the legendary Bon Scott in 1980 from a band called Geordie, is that's what they call people from somewhere. I don't remember exactly where he's from, but that's the name for people there, which I didn't know until I started looking at this. Came in for, of course, Back in Black, the follow-up to Highway to Hell. And the reason I put this up so high was, it's a double diamond selling record, but you're on the way up with your lead singer. You do Highway to Hell, that's great, and then he dies. What are you going to do now? You bring somebody in. He was 33 when he joined. 33 when he joined the band. Is credited for writing all the lyrics on Back in Black. So to me, this was what they needed to kind of unknowingly put them in a different stratosphere. I don't know what they would have done with Bon. Could he have done this? I don't know.
Yeah, and apparently, listening to the Rock on Tours with Brian Johnson, the first song he ever wrote was "You Shook Me All Night Long." Like, he didn't write in Geordie. He just shows, okay, well, let's try this one. And it's "You Shook Me All Night Long." Like, you've got to be kidding me. You cannot deny the power of Back in Black. Sold like 50 million copies around the world or something like that. And yes, he did come in as a songwriter. Tough to replace such an iconic singer. But yes, took him to a level that they weren't at before. And they've kind of been up there really ever since. So I understand the pick. I don't even have him on my honorable mention list.
Really?
Which is probably insulting to him. And it's not because I don't like him or don't respect him. It's just, Back in Black, you can't deny it. But then after that, not too long after that, he kind of stopped writing songs altogether with them. It just kind of went back to the Young Brothers or whatever. And I don't like him as a singer as much as Bon Scott. So it's not like he took the singing to another level. He's good, but he's not better, And so, that's why I guess I just didn't put him on there. Yeah,
righty.
Yeah, I love the guy. He's an icon. He's a legend. I love the albums, most of the albums with him.
What we want to do is just thank you.
Love that Thunderstruck era and when they played Donington, the AC/DC Live era with Chris Slade. Love all that stuff. But I should probably have him as an honorable mention. But
it should at least be on the honorable mention list.
But is he better than the guy he replaced?
Well, but see, the thing is with this, in my thinking, you can't really say that because the guy he replaced was dead. There's nothing. There's like, we thought we'd go in a different direction. You were screwed. You had nothing. And then he came along and at that point in time, I think kind of put the band on his back. And at least for that one record, got them where they needed to go.
Yeah, but Phil Collins was better than Pete Willis. Ronnie James Dio is a better singer than Ozzy Osbourne and a better songwriter, Mick Taylor is a better blues guitar player than Brian Jones.
Guitar player, yes. Steve
Perry is a better singer than Robert Fleischman. I'm like, is Brian Johnson better than Bon Scott? And when I said no, I couldn't put him on the list. So that was my reasoning.
Well, that's why we're here.
That's right. That's where the debate comes from.
This would be a very boring show.
And we do agree a lot because we're just kind of in the same zone on a lot of stuff. So that's good. All right. Well, here's where it's going to be a little different for you and me because number 2, I put Neil Peart of Rush.
Okay.
Did not put him number 1. Replaced John Rutsey after they did the Rush album. First album was Fly By Night and joined the band in 1974. And here's a little tidbit that I can't believe I didn't know. The band he was in before was called Hush. So he went from Hush to Rush. I never knew that. All the books I've read about them, all the information I've absorbed on Rush over the years, I had no idea that he was in Hush. That's amazing. But he's arguably the greatest drummer in the history of rock music. He helped form their sound. The amount of music that they made with 3 people was extraordinary. It helped Alex and Geddy lift their game. And not to mention, he writes all the lyrics because he was so well read and well spoken and intelligent that he wrote about stuff that very few rock bands can't. So really put them on the prog, hard rock, Mount Rushmore of greatest bands ever. And it was really because of him. And obviously he's more technical than Rutsey ever was. So yeah, I mean, love the guy. Saw him play 12 times. The band I've seen play the most live is Rush. And anytime it's like, okay, here's the drum solo. That's a bathroom break, or I'm going to get a drink, or let me go look at the t-shirts for a while. Not when Neil was doing his solo, man. That's why you went. So yeah, I mean, about the greatest free agent pickup ever, and I'm going to assume he's your number one.
That is correct. Yes. And I put him in number one because, like I said, I was kind of going through here with the ages of people. He was 23 when they picked him up from Hush, replaced John Rutsey in 74. And from day one, like you said, changed the game as far as like lyrical content. If you go back and listen to that first Rush record, Got No Time to Live In, I'm working all the time. That's why they call me the working man. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a little on the nose there. You know,
right.
we need an upgrade here. He upgraded not only the songwriting, but the drumming to a point where, you know, he is arguably the number one drummer in hard rock, progressive rock, and he can write all the lyrics. And he's an author and a guy who basically just said, what's the most excellent thing I can do today? I'm going to ride my bike 100 miles or tour on my motorcycle and write books. And yeah, just a guy who completely, I think to me, just completely changed that band and moved it into the direction. Even though they only had one record, you could see where that wasn't where they were going to go without him.
Yeah, an amazing man and a resilient man, you know, to lose your wife and daughter in 18 months and not just totally pack it up. Do you know what would happen to me if that would happen? You know, you'd have your own show, Jackson. I wouldn't be around anymore, you know.
I would feel exactly the same way. Yeah, a guy who could put up with a lot and was never really that. I mean, he never wanted to do meet and greets. He just wasn't that kind of guy. Like, he just wanted to play his music. Not that he was a jerk. He just didn't feel comfortable doing that.
He's shy. That's okay. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with that. He's like, it makes me feel uncomfortable and say, you're the greatest drummer in the whole. He doesn't want to hear that every night, you know. Right. So that's fine. You know, I understand. No, an extraordinary talent. Unbelievable. He's number two for me, number one for you, but number one for me, I had to put David Gilmour, man. I just, you know, how big are Pink Floyd in the world of rock and roll? How many records have they sold? I mean, you have to be the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Elvis, maybe the Eagles to have outsold Pink Floyd. And the reason that they had all that huge success, sorry, Roger, it's not you. It's the voice of David Gilmour. You don't have the voice, Roger, and his extraordinary guitar playing. Now, I had a beef with some of your info there because, yes, Ummagumma was the first one that did not feature Sid, but they were a 5-piece, and he did play on Saucer Full of Secrets, their second album.
Okay.
He's not on Piper at the Gates of Dawn, their first album, but he did come in 67. And I think it was December of 67 they asked him to join, and then by March of 68, Sid was completely out or something like that because he was just losing his brain. Yeah, he was in Bullet. But the voice and the guitar of Pink Floyd, take his voice and his guitar out of Dark Side of the Moon. Take his voice and his guitar out of Wish You Were Here. Take his voice and guitar out of The Wall. And what do you have? You know, you've got Roger whining about how everybody sucks. You know, it's not the same. And Dark Side of the Moon has outsold everything but Thriller, maybe, or maybe everything including Thriller. I don't know. And a lot of it's because of David's playing. So, you know, to me, they were kind of a weird psychedelic pop band talking about a weirdo who goes around sniffing girls' panties or something like that. To becoming the biggest band on the face of the earth in the 70s. And then as not just a retro act, yes, they made Momentary Lapse of Reason and Division Bell, but a huge, huge act in the 80s and 90s. Sans Roger, sans Sid. And that's why I put Dave Gilmour number one.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
And I think that's why they'll never talk to each other again either, because you're right. If it wasn't for him, even though Waters is the kind of the architect, especially of the Wall and a lot of
certainly
Dark Side
Animals,
of the Moon, yeah, but if it was, you're right. If it wasn't for Gilmer, it would not have sounded the same. The playing wouldn't have been the same. It would, the content would probably have been the same, but the impact would not have been there.
Exactly. I mean, they're the hugest band in the world, and a lot of that is because of him, So they may have done some collective songwriting, but the execution, they couldn't have gotten better than David Gilmour. So to me, that's why he's number one. As far as honorable mentions go, yes, I did have Phil Collen on there, who was on your list. I did have Sammy Hagar, who was on your list. At first, I had Steve Howe in my top 12, just because I think his playing's extraordinary. He's an open channel. He's made so much great music in and out of Yes. But then I kind of started to realize, a lot of people in Yes. I mean, Rick Wakeman is on my honorable mention list, of course. He's really, I could probably put Jeff Downs on there. There's a lot of amazing musicians who've been in Yes. And while Steve was probably, he was probably my number 11, that I said, nope, you can't be in the top 10, Steve. But I was just like, nah, because you could put a lot of people from Yes on there. Steve Hackett was on there. And obviously, I'm a big fan of his. But although they had that great heyday of progginess in the 70s, they got huge, really huge once he left. And although I love his solo stuff, it's not super popular, especially here in America. I had Adrian Smith on my list. I just think that Bruce, as important as Adrian is to the band, Bruce's impact was bigger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when they both left in the 90s, I think they missed Bruce more than they missed Adrian. Maybe not from a songwriting perspective, but from sonically. So yeah, that was Rick Wakeman, Adrian Smith, Sammy Hagar, Steve Hackett, Phil Collen, and Steve Howe were my honorable mentions.
Okay. So one thing I wanted to bring up or ask is how far out you can get. Because one of the things that I was thinking about was the faces, the small faces to the faces.
Okay.
So, Steve Marriott leaves and basically said, screw you guys, I'm going home. And then everybody else, and then I think he goes on to do Humble Pie, form Humble Pie with Peter Frampton. So that worked out all right for him. And then everybody else picks up Rod Stewart and Ronnie Wood.
From the Jeff Beck group, yeah.
Correct. So is that, to me, that's kind of like a sidebar because it's basically a whole new group.
Yeah.
Even though they replaced them, it's something totally different. So I would do that as an honorable mention.
Okay, that's cool. There's nothing wrong with that. I would have let you get away with if you put that in the top 10. I'd say that's fine. We're not super technical. We don't want to bump stuff out. It's about getting to a good conversation, not about, oh, that's not fair. You can't do that. It's like it may have been the Shout Out Loud guys. It was somebody or Eddie Trunk, one of those guys, like Crazy Crazy Nights is not the title track of Crazy Nights because it's a different title. It's Crazy Crazy Nights, not Crazy Nights. I'm like, okay, yeah, all right. Go home and tell mommy you did real good today. All right. Just, Jesus Christ. Okay. It is the title track. All right. But whatever. But yeah, no, but I mean, and some people would say that the Kirk Hammett thing is real because Dave was there and they did, a Garage Days tape that everyone got and Dave was on that, and he wrote songs. So like, yeah, but that just doesn't count in this iteration that we're doing here, So, and there's a lot of great people who replaced somebody who was key before they got a recording contract. Like, was it important when Freddie Mercury joined Smile and then they became Queen? Yeah, but they didn't, have a career as Smile,
But Queen was never anything else.
Yeah, correct. Exactly. So, that's, yeah.
And while I agree with all of your honorable mentions, I think, yes, all of those people did move the band ahead that they were in. I've got one that's on the fence here.
Okay, fence.
And that's Dickie Betts from the Allman Brothers.
And who did he replace?
He didn't replace anybody.
They just added him?
No, okay. he was already there. But the deal was he was always kind of second to Dwayne, right? Dwayne was the guy. He was the slide guitar player. He was the king ding-a-ling in that band.
Sure.
He dies. They say, well, what are we going to do now? And Dickie says, I got this. Comes back, I don't know, how a month, 2 months later, and he's on fire. So he had it in him. He was just always kind of, I don't want to say held back, but I mean, he's not better than Dwayne Allman. I'll never give you that.
Right.
But he kind of rose up out of the ashes to become something better in that band. So I kind of like stories about that too, where he was there, but obviously he wasn't playing up to his potential.
Okay, so I can dig that as a good story or good add-on or whatever.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have let you count it.
Right. Yes. No, I
yeah.
know. I knew that wasn't, but that's just an interesting deal too. If you had somebody to, and I would say the same thing if Phil Collins had started with Genesis, a guy who was the drummer, and then all of a sudden he became something else.
Right. If you've been there since the beginning, that doesn't count just because you switch instruments. That doesn't count. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Well, as long as bands are going to have breakups and shakeups, there's going to be replacements.
Mm-hmm.
And, some of them may be a huge step up. And, a lot of times if you're a small band and then you hit the big time or you break, and you've been kind of this group of 4 guys or whatever, and now all of a sudden, well, of course you can upgrade, right? I mean, now you're a national act. You went from being a big deal in wherever you're from to all of a sudden, okay, now you're national. Well, now you can pull and get anybody you want, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's always going to be the opportunity to upgrade there. So there's, this happens over time, all the time. And these are just the 10 that you and I think were the best of all time.
Correct. Because like I said, we could talk about this for 12 hours straight. Because then you could even get into, they weren't technically in the band, but they were on the first record. They get brought in and then they hit. Kind of like that. Like to me, the one that comes up is Sebastian Bach from Skid Row, where they were, they pick him up right before, and then they get big, and then it's kind of like, then you get into that whole, the rest of the band is like, well, now wait a minute. We were the ones that humped it for years in clubs and everything else, and all of a sudden you get here and
then we blow up. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's, now wait, don't think you're on the same level here. And I think you could probably say that if Kirk Hammett was a different person, you could say that about him, but he's not. He's just a cool dude playing the guitar back there.
Yeah.
But there's that weird sense of you didn't pay your dues like everybody else.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that'd be another conversation.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways you could go with this, I guess. But to me, I mean, and these are some of the biggest bands ever. I mean, and basically, let's see here: Black Sabbath, Fleetwood Mac, Pink Floyd, the Yardbirds, Genesis, Rush, Rolling Stones, Journey. Everybody but Iron Maiden and REO Speedwagon on my list are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and part of the reason they're there is because of the people that we chose. Iron Maiden should obviously be in. It's kind of a joke that they're not. REO, I'm not that huge of a fan, but they wouldn't have had that huge selling record, and they wouldn't have all that stuff without Kevin Cronin, and still going today without him. So that's kind of my justification for all that. And you could say the same about all of them on my almost there list. Yes is in. Van Halen's obviously in. Def Leppard's in. We got another Genesis there, and more Iron Maiden, and yes. So yeah, these are bands that maybe they were good, but when they got these guys, it took them to the next level.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Well, thanks to listening to me and Jackson and our take on the top 10 rock and roll free agents of all time. It was a fun show to do, thinking about who was big, who made the biggest difference for some of the biggest bands in the history of rock and roll. And just to recap, because I know we didn't really do that at the end of the show there, Jackson's list was number 10, Marty Friedman for Megadeth, number 9, Adrian Smith of Iron Maiden, number 8, Mick Taylor of the Rolling Stones, number 7, Phil Collins of Def Leppard, number 6, Phil Collins of Genesis, number 5, David Gilmour of Pink Floyd. Number 4, Bruce Dickinson of Iron Maiden. Number 3, Sammy Hagar and Van Halen. Number 2, Brian Johnson of AC/DC. And number 1, Neil Peart of Rush. And for me, a little different. Number 10, Kevin Cronin of REO Speedwagon. Number 9 was Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page in the Yardbirds. Number 8, Ronnie James Dio and Black Sabbath. Number 7 was Steve Perry into Journey. Number 6, Phil Collins of Genesis. Number 5, Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks of Fleetwood Mac fame. Mick Taylor of the Rolling Stones was my number 4. Number 3 was Bruce Dickinson of Iron Maiden for me. Number 2, the late great Neil Peart of Rush. And of course, my number 1 was David Gilmour of Pink Floyd. And of course, I had some honorable mentions. And you could talk about a lot of people who we didn't put on our list. One that came to mind recently is, what about Ian Gillan and Deep Purple? Or even the combo of Ian Gillan and Roger Glover? Yeah, could make a great argument for that, no doubt about it. But these are our lists, and obviously it's up for debate, and it could change from moment to moment. And I'm sure some people will get all riled up. Oh, you didn't remember. Hey, You can make your own list. You can make your own podcast. But that's where we are right now, and we want to hear from you what your favorite all-time rock and roll free agents were. So you can follow us on Twitter, or X as they call it now, stupidest change ever. It's at ugly_werewolf or at actionjack72. We're also on Instagram. We're also on the new Threads. We're also on YouTube. I think we're on Facebook, though we may not get back to you there. But anyway, please follow us, check us out, and let us know about your favorite rock and roll free agents of all time. And we want to know, do we get something right? Do we get something wrong? Do we miss the point? Do we leave out your favorite part? You let us know. You can also email us. It's uglyamericanwerewolf@gmail.com. You let us know the bands, the concerts, the DVDs, the books, the rock properties that you want to hear us talk about on the show. Thanks so much to Pantheon Podcasts, which we are a proud member. And thanks, as always, to our great sponsor, rarevinyl.com. Go to Rare Vinyl, guys. Use the code UGLY. Save 10% off your purchase one time. So make sure you go in and buy a bunch of stuff and save yourself a bunch of money. Rarevinyl.com, code UGLY. It's been a fun summer here on The Wolf, and we really appreciate you coming along with us. We've got some great interviews and some great albums and some great conversations lined up here for the fall. So please download it and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Doesn't matter where it is, Apple, Spotify. Good Pods has been good to us. We've ended up in the top 5 of a bunch of their lists lately. Wherever it is, doesn't matter. Download, subscribe there. And if you're thinking about it, guys, give us a positive review. It means so much to us, and it just helps us find more rock and roll fans like you, helps us grow the show. And if you send it to us, we might just read it on the show. So until next time, to all of you rockers all around the world, be cool and keep doing what you do to keep rock alive.